Welcome back, everybody. We're here to talk about satellite connectivity in this segment. I want to thank the folks from Seakeeper and Kristen Klein at Northrop & Johnson for getting us access to the Yacht Sinbad, where we're here with Melissa Orlick, our co-host Heather, and Mike Moser from Isotropic. They're going to give us a little insight as to what goes on in the satellite world today and subscription services so that we can set some realistic expectations. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks so much.
Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
I'm not going to welcome Heather because she's been with us all day. So, Melissa, here's the situation. Unless you've been living in a cave, you're pretty much aware of the fact that the boating business is on fire. And the thing that we've realized over the course of the last 12 months is a huge influx in first-time boat buyers. Now, with the onset of the pandemic, people vacated their offices and they went and activated home offices. And the first thing that they realized was that they didn't have the bandwidth in their home system to be able to support all of the things that they needed to use. So they had the kids home from school and they were streaming, whether it was classes or video games is irrelevant. Mom had the things that she was normally used to doing and having access to during the day at home. And then here comes dad, if that happens to be the structure of the household. Here comes dad operating his business from home or having to have connectivity through his office with Zoom calls and things of that nature. We learned early in the game at IYBA that people thought they had incredible bandwidth and Wi-Fi systems at home and they could support anything they needed to do, and we'd invite a panelist to a webinar and it would be choppy and it would crash. So they've gotten all of that squared away at home. They've made their systems more robust, and then they got cabin fever and they decided we got to get out of the house or we're all going to go crazy. So fortunately, a lot of them have come to realize that boating is a great escape, and if they can afford it, they can spend extended periods of time on the boat, and they want to be able to still operate like they do at home. So let's set some realistic expectations for the brokerage community, because they're the first port of contact with all these people and the ones that are answering the questions. What do we need to tell these first-time buyers with regard to connectivity so that they can have what it is that they need and understand that there's a cost involved, but they can tailor that cost to their comfort level?
Yeah, you're exactly right. We've seen a tremendous amount of, first-time boat owners, first-time users of VSAT services or cellular services on board yachts. So setting expectations is definitely has to be the first job right off the bat. I think, first of all, if you have a VSAT system on board, you'll want to do a site survey of it, find out what equipment you have on board and what capabilities that equipment can do. Can it travel to the places that you want to go to? Can it provide you the speeds that you need to? If you don't have equipment, you need to work with either your marine electronics dealer or a technician service and find out what you can install on board based on the size of the yacht, based on where you're going to go, and possibly the capabilities, again, of what you really want to stream.
I want to step back real quickly to one of the first things that you said in where you're going to go. So many of these services, as I remember from years ago, were tailored to small geographic areas. Is that still the case? Do you have to pretty much define where you're going to be operating the boat, or can you have wide-ranging connectivity?
Well, especially I think with COVID and so forth, I think people are trying to get as far away as they can, obviously, from shore-based side. So everything from down to the Caribbean, South America, Panama, Costa Rica, a lot of people are going everywhere these days. So you want to be able to have a system and have a provider that can provide you either with the coverage of the regions you want to go to or specific locations. So you definitely want to ask those questions on both ends, equipment-wise and a service provider side.
Okay. So when we've identified the equipment that we're going to need to get the reach that we'll want for the area that we're going to be traveling, and we've determined the subscription, what is it that we can, let's use as an example, a 70-foot boat that's going to travel the southeastern United States and the Bahamas. So let's just use that as an easy template to work from, because it's a big piece of what we do. What would we be telling that first-time buyer he's going to need for that, and what would his expectations be in his ability to stay connected? Let's say he has a wife and 2 children that are going to be on board the boat with him traveling, and let's have a captain so that he doesn't run aground and have to use his VSAT to call for help.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. I think the biggest thing, and I think even in just yachting alone, the more educated you are on what you really need, is key. So be educated on what you think you're going to be using for applications. Is your wife going to be shopping and possibly shopping for another house? Are you going to be trying to use your office and using Zoom calls? And are your kids doing remote learning, or are they just on board trying to do their video gaming? What are all those applications, and what do those applications actually require for speed? Because as we know, each one of those requires different speeds. So you're going to want to make sure that your package allows for all of you as a users to be able to have that.
Okay.
That brings up a question that I just thought of. I know with my cellular data plan, they have this thing called unlimited, which we all know there's no real such thing as unlimited. Is there something like that with these kinds of systems as well? Like an unlimited plan, or
yeah,
about
so
that?
Unlimited has been such an ambiguous term that's been thrown around, and I think a lot of people think that that's what they need to ask for, which in reality, a number of cellular carriers, a number of VSAT service providers have actually redefined that term to really just mean no overage charges. So at the end of the day, you want to dig deeper and find out what the service providers are actually offering for you. Are they offering you month-to-month contracts? Are they offering you 3-month contracts? What are those actual terms, and what's the flexibility of it? Because maybe they want to go from one location to another, and then they need to go home to visit other family. Do they need to have services during those off periods is really the questions you should be asking.
Sure. So I guess you need to figure out, what is it that you're doing? Are you Zooming? Are you just searching the internet? Are you streaming Netflix? So is that, I guess, a bandwidth question maybe, or do you ask the client, what do you typically do when you're using your internet? Are you on Zoom for client meetings? I know that's what I would personally be doing, but my little cousin might want to be streaming his video games. So what are the differences there, and what kind of accommodations can you make for different clients?
Certainly. I can touch on that. So, before we get to that, I think you should understand what bandwidth packages, how they're structured. And that typically comes with an MIR and a CIR. Your MIR is your maximum information rate. And what that means is that's your burstable speed. That's the highest speed that you can achieve on that bandwidth package. Your CIR is your committed information rate. Those are the minimum speeds that your package will allow. Your minimum speeds that you can achieve on that bandwidth package, regardless of network congestion or contention on the actual network, because that comes into play a lot too. And if there's contention on the network, your CIR is really going to be important, because those are the minimum speeds you're going to be achieving. And with that said, going back to some of the requirements in streaming and things of that nature and video conferencing, understanding the requirements that each one of those platforms or those applications require will help you choose your MIR and CIR accordingly. For example, Netflix requires 2 megabytes download speed committed for standard definition TV. If you want to get into an HD connection, you're going to want to be closer to a 5 meg connection. And from there, going into video conferencing, that's a whole different animal. Netflix is very download intensive. With video conferencing, you're sending video packets off the boat just as much as you're receiving them to the boat. So that actually puts a strain on the upload side of things, making the upload and the download equally important. So those are some things you want to consider when looking at bandwidth packages and looking to stream. And one other thing I'd like to touch on is the amount of devices. If you're streaming from one smart TV, we'll say, that wants HD connection, it's going to be a 5 meg package. If you're looking to do the same thing on maybe a gaming PC or another TV on board, or maybe a tablet or something, you have to take that into consideration. If you have 4 devices that you're going to be streaming Netflix from, you're going to want to multiply those requirements by 4 to make sure that you have the bandwidth there. If you don't do those things, you're going to have a lackluster experience. There's going to be buffering, the spinning wheel that we're probably familiar with, and having all that full picture.
Hourglass.
Yes.
So that brings a question to me, Mike, and that is, we're accustomed in a home environment or an office environment to the ability to go on to speed test, Google speed test, and you can download a speed test. Is this what you're talking about with regard to your MIRs and your CIRs? Can you do a speed test, or is that something that is already determined in the package and you should expect that level of performance?
I would always recommend a speed test. I mean, we do it at home. We should be doing it on our boats as well. You know, at any given time, there can be congestion on a network and everything. So checking your speeds frequently will allow you to understand, you know, is there congestion on the network? Do I need to make a phone call, or am I really reaching the speeds? And knowing that you're getting what you're paying for is critical. And going back to those bandwidth requirements as well, running a speed test and you find that, you know, I'm getting 20 megabytes a second, that's great. Maybe you only need 5 megabytes, you know, per second for what you're looking to do with the network on board, that given charter or, you know, owner's trip or whatever it may be. So understanding the requirements of not only the personnel on board, but the amount of devices and the actual requirements of the applications is critical to a good overall experience.
When you're talking about congestion on the network, are you talking about congestion on your localized network, or are you talking about congestion on the feed to your equipment on your boat? So are we talking about just the fact that I've got 4 iPads playing on my boat, or that I'm getting a limited amount of signal in and out to my boat?
Well, it can actually be both, really. There can be congestion from your service provider, and those are phone calls that, you know, if you determine that you are having a lackluster experience, make a phone call to see what's going on. Maybe there's a better satellite for your area. There's a lot of variables that are in play when it comes to satellite communications. Where you're located within the satellite footprint, the equipment that you have on board, how you're using the bandwidth. And it goes back to, like you said, the being on board. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
I thought of a question. You were speaking of having multiple devices on board. Let's say I have a very important video conference that I need to be on, and my little cousin is playing his video games. Is there any way that you can set a priority level of who gets the more bandwidth, or is there something like that that's available?
Absolutely, certainly, and that's what we call data management. And
Okay.
they make numerous different devices. At Isotropic, we use Data Dragon, and what Data Dragon does is uses what we call flow command to shape your traffic and prioritize applications based on the needs. So if you find that you're going to be using Zoom for the video conference that day, you can actually prioritize the Zoom application to get the bandwidth before any other devices on board receive that bandwidth. So that would obviously come from the personnel on board and what they find would be the most highest priority. So that could be a captain having reserved upload bandwidth to send a large attachment email. Maybe they need to send documents to their next port of call or their yacht manager. Those are all critical, you know, communications that need to get out off the boat. And if there's congestion on the actual internal network where you're maxing out those speeds, you may not have bandwidth available to get those critical documents or emails off the boat. So understanding the requirements and knowing your bandwidth packages is really critical.
So you call that data management. Is that something that's included in your services? Is that an additional service? Going back to setting realistic expectations for first-time buyers, is that something that they should expect to add on, or is that usually included?
With our service, it's included. With other providers, it may be a charge, a per-month charge. And they may use different types of devices. I mentioned flow command, and the way we see the networks is everything is a flow. Every device that's connected to a network is a flow. And where we coin the term flow command is commanding those flows to go, making sure the bandwidth is delivered where it needed most and not being wasted on things that are maybe running in the background that aren't needed, whether it's a video caching service or something of that nature, just chewing up that critical bandwidth that you need.
So being able to prioritize, can you set that up out of the gate so that it's always one link, one person, one device that has the priority, and then you can set a priority 2 for another person or device and a priority 3 for and on down through the chain?
Correct. Yep. So you can, you know, separate your network so that the owner and the guests get the priority of things, and then your crew and so forth get secondary.
So it's good to be king.
It is.
Okay. So, Mike, one of the things that you just mentioned, and whichever one of you chooses to answer this is fine, you talked about geographic areas and them being defined. Is it, I'm going to guess that the satellites are in a geofixed orbit, correct?
Certainly.
So they're in a specific location and they are in sync with the orbit of the Earth. Is the defined boundary on the satellite signal a very sharp defined boundary, or do you just start to lose it? Do they overlap? How does it, if you choose to move around, how does that work?
They do overlap in certain instances, certainly, and it is a gradual fall off as you're reaching the edge of the footprint. And as you're reaching the edge of the footprint, you're going to lose signal strength, which can affect your bandwidth speeds. So it is critical to have multiple satellite options, especially in the area that you're traveling. You want to have more than just one or two options, if possible, 3 or 4. And that gives you different look angles. Like you had mentioned, the satellites are geostationary, so they are spinning with the same speed of the Earth. They're always fixated in a specific part of the sky. So with that said, you may be looking east to one specific satellite, and maybe there's a big mountainous area in your way that's blocking that line of sight that you need to be able to hit that satellite. Having different options allows you to have different look angles where maybe you're blocked to the east, you have an option to your west that can give you connectivity. And that's really critical and something you should look at when speaking with a satellite provider to ensure that you're getting multiple options when it comes to satellites.
Okay, all right. So what we've been talking about so far has been predominantly focused on internet connectivity. What other connectivities should we be thinking about? Well, my first thought is telephone type connectivity. We're all used to having cellular phones. As Heather had mentioned, the cellular package says it's unlimited. What are the different connectivities that we're really needing to focus on here other than internet?
I think other ones that you should look at is obviously always safety systems, right? So
Okay.
between, a SAT-C, GMDSS, depending on what your flag state regulates you as for your vessel. I also think always having a handheld satellite sat phone is always great, whether you're leaving the yacht and maybe going ashore, the handheld radios aren't working for that distance, you have some means of communication if your cell phone service isn't working. I think for us, those are some big ones. Again, depending on the size of your yacht, you could look at having another backup system, whether it's through an Iridium or Inmarsat network, which just provides you a redundancy of communications.
Okay, so it gives you some backup.
Yep.
So what we're talking about in satellite primarily is through connectivity of data, but we also have the ability to piggyback voice on top of that.
Right, so with all of our VSAT services, for example, and probably through many other service providers, you have voice over IP. So it's an internet voice line that you have through satellite. So you'll have those that go through the satellite network and go out the same way you would through the data.
So different from the old days when we had to have dedicated ones. Now we have VoIP, which allows you to use a singular satellite, a subscription service that's going to provide you all those different conveniences and connectivities.
Exactly. So it would just be similar to a VoIP desk phone that you may see in your office, or similar to an at-home office or so forth. You pick it up, you dial out just the same way that you would at your house.
Okay. All right. So setting realistic expectations has been the primary goal for what we're trying to do here and help people understand how to communicate with their client base, what their needs are. Is there anything else that we feel like would be important to convey to that first-time owner? Is there a question that I haven't asked that you get frequently?
I think for, on our side, I think it's really truly total cost of ownership, right?
Right.
We all know whether market you are in within yachting, marketing is amazing and it can provide amazing information to you, but what you really want to dig down deep is look at the fine print. What all are you committing to? Are there any hidden fees? Make sure there's no strings attached. You don't want to walk out there and find out 3 months later, I've got an additional $35 or per month charge or $100 charge or whatever it may be. Find out if there is anything that's below the surface.
I think those $35 charges are pretty absorbable. I think it's those $3,500 charges that give people that's an attention getter. And to give a pricing is very, very difficult to do.
Yep.
But are we talking about ranges of hundreds of dollars for a monthly subscription of good connectivity where I could be running my life from my boat, or are we talking about in the thousands of dollars range?
For the VSAT service, you're going to be looking at thousands of dollars. And even on the cellular side too, if you want solid enterprise data, you're still going to be looking at an expense there that's going to be over a few $100s.
So again, that goes right back to the initial conversation, and that's realistic expectations.
Yep.
You know, it's very easy to say, well, heck, if they can afford the boat, they can afford this stuff. But the reality of it is we all live in the real world. And where we choose to make our expenditures and where we choose to spend our discretionary dollars is dictated by the overall cost. So we want to have happy experiences. If we want mom to not be shopping for a new house, but maybe shopping for a new boat so she has more room and she has a good case of 2-foot-itis that we all hope they get, we want them to have realistic expectations of the overall experience, because there's no worse surprise than looking back on your chart of accounts at the end of the year and saying, I spent how much on that? Nobody ever told me that.
Yep.
So these pieces are really important to understand clearly.
It is, and true transparency. I think that's the biggest thing. If you have transparency from the service provider to you, and you provide transparency back, whether that's the captain providing it or the broker, so that the both parties really know what's being requested, sets a great expectation.
Everybody needs to be informed.
Yep.
Absolutely. Mike, is there anything else that you feel would be important for the audience to know about the technical aspects of it, the expectations that they can have, the speeds on board that you could normally consider to be supporting certain amounts of equipment, or, you know, is it a normal thing to be able to run a couple, 3 or 4 devices at one time, or is that something you really have to be specific of in your site survey?
It's definitely important during the site survey, and you certainly can use multiple devices on the VSAT system simultaneously. That's not an issue. It goes back to the data management side of things. If you're really paying attention to what you're doing on the network and ensuring all that bandwidth is being used wisely and going to the applications that have those priorities, you know, it can cut down on your total cost of ownership. You're not needing to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars on a bandwidth package. You maybe can go from needing 8 megabytes to only needing 6 megabytes, and that could be the savings of thousands of dollars per month. And you know, cutting down on those requirements and everything is really just a data management type of situation. It's not allowing things to go to waste, and managing the network properly. And that comes from not only the satellite provider, but also the onboard network from a LAN and a WAN perspective.
So that brings up an interesting question. When I subscribe to my service, am I locked into that service for a period of time, or is there ability for me to be flexible and say, you know what, I thought I was going to need a 12 megabyte packet and I'm really only using 7. Can I scale that down to an 8 so I have a little extra? Or conversely, if I've subscribed to an 8 and my business takes off and I'm doing a lot of Zooms and I need more bandwidth, can I get with the provider and modify that program?
So that's what you definitely need to speak right off the bat with your provider. What am I committed to?
Okay.
Some companies are very flexible. Some companies have more restrictions. You might be only able to upgrade for a month with one company. You might be able to upgrade per day with another company, which again, that goes back to your total cost of ownership. Are you using bandwidth when you need it?
Well, and there's a particularly pertinent application that comes to mind, and that is a boat that's privately owned, but maybe goes into the charter season for a period of time. Let's just say it's a privately owned boat, and the guy uses it with his family, but then it goes into charter for 8 weeks commitment in the Caribbean during the winter. So his demands are going to be significantly higher, and he has to be able to monitor what that cost is so he can factor it into his charter costs.
Yep, we see that very frequently. A lot of privately owned yachts, but they do have a certain amount of weeks out of the year that they do want to allow for charter for whatever reason it may be. And, you know, there is the flexibility where it's, you know, the owner only needs X amount of data, but they know that this charter coming on is very, very kid friendly, a lot of activity. They don't want to be playing outside. They want to be gaming or whatever we need to be. They're able to upgrade just for that charter week.
One of the charter guests is going to be shopping for a boat.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Maybe that boat that they're on.
You got to be able to go to yachtbroker.org, the IYBA multiple listing system, and find your new boat.
Exactly.
Shameless plug.
And we should also know what the MLS requires for bandwidth.
That's right. It's elegant, it's minimal, and it's intuitive.
Exactly. So you do want to be able to have that flexibility so that the charter guest is only paying for the bandwidth when they're on board, because you don't want to have to put that cost over to a charter and say, oh, well, you have to pay for the whole month at an upgraded rate. No, you should only pay for it for the period that you're on board.
And really you don't want to set your charter rate to where you lose money.
Exactly.
Because it's a business.
Certainly.
It's a business. This has really been enlightening, and I think one of the most important things that we can do in the brokerage community is to assist the brokers through our educational components in learning all the technical aspects that they can possibly absorb, and again, setting realistic expectations.
Yep.
Because bringing people in is super important. For years and years and years, we've been looking for ways to get people engaged in the yachting industry. Now our quest is to keep them engaged. Melissa, Mike, thanks so much. Heather, are there any other questions that you need, or are you pretty well informed?
I'm pretty well informed, Paul.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this segment. We're going to go to a break and we'll be back.
Yacht Engineering Week 2021 has been made possible by Pantropic Power, the only authorized Caterpillar Power Systems dealer in South Florida. Florida Nautical Surveyors, your complete solution to all of your vessel surveying needs. And Robert Allen Law, exclusively dealing with the business of yachting. We would also like to thank Quantum Stabilizers, AME Solutions, DeAngelo Exhaust, MPI Marine Professionals Incorporated, Concord Marine Electronics, Lauderdale Marine Center, Marine Data, Isotropic, Dockmate, and Murray Ventilation Products. Thank you for joining us this year. We'll see you in 2022.